PCASC, Portland Central America Solidarity Committee has three strong words in its mission: education, mobilization, and it's implicit in it, organization. Our focus of attention is the Americas. As you can tell if you remember that we share the same birthday as the Sandinista Revolution. In our core values, we put in action our mission: education, action, leadership, relationships. Also, we clearly express that we are anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist. Nowadays, more than ever, we have to emphasize this last part. Our core members are luchadores solidarios. On and off, some of us have been with PCASC as early as 1994. Others have joined in this 21st century, and others already forgot. Since when is not important. I'll mention their names. Nan, PCASC member since 2005. She has been the CISPES connection to PCASC for many years and has been a board member off and on since 2007. Nan is the board president and makes sure that we keep encouraging our members to give money so that we can pass it on to our partners in Latin America. Paige, PCASC member since 2008. She has been involved in various projects within PCASC and has been supporting the struggle of the injured Colombian GM workers since 2011. Jack, involved in solidarity action with Latin America. He's passing on action and donation requests, meeting announcements and information, news, analysis, opinion, supporting people's liberation movements to our public and members of Congress, with the goal of us gathering together to overthrow U.S. government oppression and build a united, fulfilling solidarity and liberation movement and then society we are called to be, learning, loving, living into this together. Eli, PCASC intern since 2019. He has brought a fresh, young perspective and keeps our social media going. Eli just finished his first year in the master's program in Latin America Studies at Tulane University and credits PCASC with getting him into the program. Dago, PCASC member since 1994, writing for La Lucha Solidaria. Recently, he has been involved in redesigning the webpage, in charge of the edition of the new Solidaridad en el Siglo XXI newsletter. Today, we will have two guests as speakers. Frank Hammer, he will talk about his experience supporting Colombian workers. And Erika Takeo, she will describe her solidarity work with Trabajadores del Campo in Nicaragua. We also will include three songs that Lolo Kutumay, a Salvadorian singer, recorded for our event. You are now connected to us with your own electronic device. I will ask you to imagine that electronic device that you have in your hand or over your desk is your own unicycle. I will ask you to imagine that with your own unicycle, you can travel to other worlds, where justice is something you no longer have to die for, where strong winds of solidarity have taken borders down, where peace is no longer a dead word, but an effervescent energy. For PCASC, the memory of Ben Linder, dressed as a clown while riding his unicycle to bring joy to Nicaraguan kids, enliven our spirits. And like him, we feel compelled to express our active solidarity toward Latin America. Some of you will remember Ben. Others might ask who he is. Well, Ben was a Portlander whose life was taken by the Contras in Nicaragua when he was developing rural projects to bring electricity to poor towns. His sacrifice and all the energy that through all these years some of you have devoted to PCASC makes me feel proud to have been engaged in this organization. I, in the name of the core members of this prestigious and progressive organization, give to all of you the most warm welcome to this spring virtual brunch. And don't forget that you can donate to PCASC on our website, pcas.net. We have a small base of sustainers and we need more so that we can better support our partners in Latin America with material aid. As an all-volunteer organization, we use our sustainers and donors' money to spread around in solidarity with the struggles in Latin America. Help us by clicking the donate button and sign up to make it a monthly donation, large and small, it all helps.
I'm probably his biggest fan, although I might be in the running with the workers there in Colombia. He is a retired auto worker. He entered in the plant for General Motors, working for them in 1974. And so he has a really unique experience that has been central to the struggle. And he also, he lives in Detroit, where GM is positioned, where their central headquarters are, and has been a part of a number of different groups, including the Michigan Coalition for Human Rights, Auto Worker Caravan, the Real News, all of which have been central to our effort going forward. So I have to say, he's an incredible person to work with. I'm so eternally grateful for everything that he's done. He's been right by my side as we've gone through 10 years of work. Frank.
Oh my goodness. Paige, thank you. And I just have to say that you are a rare example of somebody that has believed in her mission more tenaciously than anybody else that I know. And I've always had great admiration for your tenacity through thick and thin. And that's why here we are 10 years later in this conversation with PCASC. And you're the one that introduced me to PCASC. And though I haven't been sharing in any brunches, I've certainly gotten to know a lot about PCASC and been working collaboratively with PCASC through none other than Paige. So thank you all, and thank you for this opportunity. I am preparing for this. We talked about, maybe 20 minutes. I haven't timed what I'm going to say. But in thinking more and more about it, I wanted to spend the 20 minutes more to contextualize what we've been doing in regards to this magnificent support for GM workers, members of a Sochicol, to give that a context and maybe to get into some details if you desire during the Q&A. So yes, I entered the GM workforce in 1974. I did it because I was an anti-imperialist, and I so much appreciate that that is a foundational rock of PCASC, because that says everything in terms of your consciousness and your understanding. I worked 20 years in my plant. During the course of that time, I won the honor of representing my membership. It was over 3,500 workers at a GM transmission plant just in the outskirts of Detroit. And even though I was a part of the grassroots resistance movement in the UAW and part of a pro-democracy movement in the UAW, in the last 6 years of my life, I actually was on staff, which was unheard of. And during the time that I was on staff, I represented GM workers in arbitrations and in grievance negotiations. And the reason I say all of that is to share a little story which I think contextualizes our circumstances. And the story is this. In 2003, but I retired at the end of 2006. I had the opportunity to be part of national negotiations with GM, and I sat in on several subcommittees. One of the subcommittees was about outsourcing, and this is where the UAW would attempt to negotiate, language that would, further prevent GM from outsourcing work that's done in the U.S. And of course, it's been doing that for years and years and years. And any of you might have noticed that GM is planning to build new electric vehicles where else but in Mexico. So, but the story that I wanted to share with you is that there were other staff members of the UAW who were the negotiators who were telling their GM counterparts or complaining to the counterparts about the work going to Mexico. And the GM negotiators responded by saying, well, listen, how do you think that we're able to pay you the benefits and the wages that we pay you if it weren't for the fact that we were able to go to Mexico? And at that point, the room fell silent, and the subject was dropped. And I think it sort of quintessentially represents what we're confronted with here in fighting imperialism and colonialism. It's daunting, and it's a long haul struggle. It's daunting for the victims of imperialism, those who are oppressed in the neo-colonies around the world. And it is daunting for us who are within the monster, within the belly of the monster, in trying to fight to defeat imperialism from within. And the story, this experience that I had, revealed to me what a Russian revolutionary said a century ago, Lenin, that with the rise of capitalism into its latest stage of imperialism, there's also the development of an aristocratic class in labor, or the labor aristocracy, who are wedded to imperialism and who are wedded to the system. And I think that's very important in understanding the obstacles we face, for example, in the labor movement, when we embark on solidarity campaigns on behalf of workers in places such as El Salvador or in Colombia. There's no wall between that aristocracy, the very well-paid bureaucrats in the House of Labor. There's no wall between them and the working class as a whole. And that ideology seeps into the working class more generally. And so we're confronted with that kind of ideology in our everyday life. And that ideology serves to drive a wedge between the workers of the U.S. with workers in other countries, to the point that, we can witness workers here willing to chant USA, USA, and see the workers in Mexico or China, as well as other places, as responsible for stealing our jobs. So this is the general terrain that we work in. And this is the terrain that we have worked with and as part of our solidarity campaign on behalf of GM workers in Colombia, on behalf of the Xochicol. If the working class movement had a video as stark as was shared in social media a year ago of the cold-blooded murder of George Floyd, maybe we would be further along in the revolutionary process. The achievements of the Black Lives Matter movement have been truly monumental in raising global consciousness and unleashing a truly global interracial solidarity movement. Witnessing here at home the largest solidarity movement in U.S. history. Quite remarkable that we could witness here in suburban Macomb County, which by the way is where my plant is located, as the home of the Reagan Democrats, demonstrations of white and black working class youth demanding justice behind the murder of George Floyd. And even raising the level of consciousness to recognizing what we were witnessing was a systemic problem. The buzzword now is systemic racism. They don't talk about what the system is that perpetrates that racism, but the cat is out of the bag, and it is up to us in our grassroots movements to identify what it is and how we should strategize against it to eradicate the perversive institutional racism in the U.S. I would make similar remarks about the Palestinian Liberation Movement, which witnessed its George Floyd moment in the recent devastation of Gaza at the hands of the USA via the instrument of Zionist Israel. As solidarity activists who've worked with PCASC and with Portland Jobs with Justice know, imperialism ultimately undermines the working class of the imperialist country. The corporations threaten our livelihoods with exportation of our jobs in what Page is fond of referring to as the race to the bottom. The only way to win that race is to be at the bottom, a hollow victory for sure. So my union embarked back in the 80s, I'm talking about the UAW, on a path of cooperation formally in the 80s by convincing workers to adopt a strategy of competition. So where do we end up? Michigan used to be the gold standard of unionism, and today we are a right-to-work state. Detroit is a union town, but today we're witnessing the construction of an Amazon warehouse that by all intents and purposes appears to it's going to be non-union when it opens its doors. Where we are today in this Amazon situation is that a middle class job has been redefined into a $15 an hour job. That's what the mayor of the city of Detroit how he has described the future jobs at Amazon. Whereas GM workers were making production workers making $28, $29 an hour. Certainly in the decades when I was working at the end of my career, and even so now, there are legacy workers that are making that much. But today, a middle-class job is $15 an hour. And that's what the second-tier workers at the GM plants make. So we're confronted with what the results have been for what the workers are faced with today. So our struggle against GM, whether it be here or whether it be in Colombia, has to do with ultimately the fate of workers in the U.S. And the sooner that workers in the U.S. understand that, the greater the solidarity is going to be globally, which is what we need. The interesting thing about Amazon is that there is a global labor movement afoot, a global solidarity movement afoot, so that when Bessemer workers went out, organizing, by the way, against the same kind of working conditions that confronted Jorge Parra and Carlos Trujillo in GM in Bogota, with the working conditions resulting in injuries and people losing their jobs, is that there's a solidarity movement that was built up behind Bessemer that reached as far as Italy, where Amazon workers went on a strike in support of the Amazon workers who were organizing in Alabama. And there are other examples around this country and other parts of the world where we're beginning to see the kind of labor solidarity movement that we long for. So the importance of the GM injured workers fight in Colombia has always been more than just about supporting their heroism, their valor, their tenacity, and their demand for their sacred right to dignified work. It's about all of us. All of it has been extraordinary. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves with mounting not one but several hunger strikes, from the precarious position of their tent encampment at the foot of the massive fortress that is the U.S. Embassy, engaging in that struggle in a country famous for the countless murders and assassinations of workers who wish to lead organizing drives in Colombia. Over 3,000 such assassinations before they finally muscled through the free trade agreement with Colombia in 2011. And even so, we continue to witness the assassinations to this day of human rights fighters alongside the union brothers and sisters. I think there are many examples that are inspiring in regarding the global solidarity that PCASC aspires to and works for. Certainly the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, where labor weighed in, refusing to unload ships on the West Coast, boycott, divestment and sanctions movement that ultimately defeated the apartheid regime and initiated a new era in South Africa. I was part of a labor movement in the 80s against the Civil War, the war that the U.S. was perpetrating in Central America, as part of something, the Labor Committee for Freedom and Democracy in El Salvador, where a significant contingent of the AFL-CIO challenged the leadership and fought to end that war. We've had examples of steelworkers supporting Mexican miners. We've had the example of even here in 2019, where we had a GM strike that lasted for 40 days, and there were workers who were in the first tier who were in solidarity and strike to bring up the workers that were in the second tier. And it was not only GM workers, but workers from GM, from Ford, and from Chrysler, who all came on the picket lines and showed a selfless solidarity, which is part of what we're talking about, that we've been building for so many years. By virtue of a social and the solidarity movement that grew around it, and for which PCASC has been so essential, GM encountered opposition which it never anticipated. And I can tell you, General Motors was shocked. Asochical's example forced GM to modernize operations at the Comotores plant, which was a UAW rep said a U.S. auto worker would never work in that plant. The conditions were so poor, and they were so fraught with injuries and all kinds of disorders for the workers. While Asochical and the Solidarity Movement haven't been able to stop illegal firings of injured workers, it might have slowed them down some, it has developed the capacity to force GM, even through Colombia's courts, to rehire workers who were illegally discharged. Unheard of. Unheard of. That a workers' movement forced the hand of General Motors contrary to its wishes. And today is going forward with a broad campaign to force the rehiring of another 24 workers who we claim were illegally fired subsequent to their injuries. Essential to all these efforts have been several umbrella organizations, including Jobs with Justice in Portland and PCASC, and here in Detroit, the Michigan Coalition for Human Rights, which gave a formal and official voice to a grassroots movement and gave it its legitimacy. And here in Detroit, it was the Michigan Coalition for Human Rights that honored Jorge Parra with the International Labor Activist Award, the first of its kind in its 40-year history. These PCASC and the other organizations have lent credibility and its organizational networks and resources to the ongoing campaign, which have been essential. And I have to say that here in Detroit, certainly in the early years of our campaign, we had a great outpouring of auto worker support for our efforts and for our work. And when the story hit them, they responded, and there were many locals that we were in company with Jorge, telling the story, and where workers from their hearts responded in a solidarity effort and a solidarity campaign. But it's been difficult, when I spoke earlier about a labor aristocracy, that we have an edifice of a labor movement that has turned its back and betrayed the workers at GM and Comotores, and makes the struggle much more arduous, much more longer, but it certainly has had some incredible accomplishments in the course of our work. I want to end by just quoting Karl Marx: "Labor in the white skin can never free itself as long as labor in the black skin is branded. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Frank. Thank you, Paige. We open the time for question and answers. If anybody in the audience have a question for Frank and Paige, speak.
Frank, I was wondering if you would mind, I know that there's a number of people that are on this call that maybe aren't so familiar with what's going on in Colombia. Could you just give a broad description of that piece of it?
So when you say what's going on in Colombia, I mean, I guess we should be talking about...
I mean specifically with Azotreco, like they might not have heard about Azotreco before today.
Okay. So that's what I was hoping for. I was hoping that we could do that in the Q&A. So, so in 2010, 2011, hundreds of workers were fired from the GM Comotores plant who had suffered injuries and who the company had their medical records to know that these were workers that they no longer could use, and they were going to be hired and fired and replaced by younger workers. And this actually, we came to understand, was the labor model of GM that's, of course, been adopted by many other companies. And 68 of those workers decided that that was not acceptable, and they formed a social under the leadership of Jorge Parra, who was its president. And a year into their formation of a social and attempts to go through legal routes to get their jobs back, which was a failure, they decided that they would take their struggle to the streets, and they would stage an encampment at the U.S. Embassy during the time that Obama was the president, and it was on the heels of a free trade agreement that was negotiated that included something called the Labor Action Plan. So they thought that the best place to be to wage their struggle and to win, because, by the way, this was also the same moment that GM had gone into bankruptcy, and the Obama administration was actually the 26% owner of GM at that moment. The anticipation was that they would be able to convince the Obama administration of the justice of their cause and that they would be reinstated. And that proved to be wrong. And that is where the struggle embarked. On the year anniversary, Jorge and other fellow workers at the tank encampment, including Carlos and Manuel and others, staged a hunger strike. And not only did they stage a hunger strike, which lasted 23 days, but they did it with a dramatic move of stitching their lips shut and showing to the world exposing what was going on in the Comotores. And that's where the struggle emerged. And we had the good fortune that there was a delegation that Paige was part of that visited in Colombia and came in touch with the Asociacal. And within the year, in 2012, we had Jorge Parra, who came to the U.S. to tell his story, came to one of the Labor Notes conferences in Chicago, and it was from there that the movement here in the U.S. Was sparked and grew. And since then, the workers have engaged in dramatic actions at the tent encampment, including 2-3 additional hunger strikes, and other moral acts of witness, and also came to the United States and spread the word through a tour in the U.S. that really alerted people as to what it was like at a GM plant in Colombia and what the struggle was that was unfolding there. So in the ensuing years, we've had the wonderful examples of solidarity actions, demonstrations at the Detroit Auto Show, at the Detroit headquarters of General Motors. We've had the likes of Paige and a comrade engaging in a 1,000-mile bike ride visiting the the homes of the board of directors of General Motors. We actually crashed the shareholders meeting in 2018 after we've been at several others, and General Motors has ceased holding live in-person shareholder meetings as a result of our action crashing and challenging Mary Barra, the CEO, over maintaining the poor conditions and the injustice to Xochitl. So that gives you a little bit of a background as to some of what the work that we've entailed and been part of, and that we've supported with the workers there in Bogota.
Okay, any other question to Frank?
I sure hope I didn't answer all of them.
This is Jack. I'm wondering if Alma and other folks working on unionizing, organizing ununionized workers and so on, or others doing that here would have questions.
And before you do, I do want to give a shout out to Jack. Jack has been incredible in this effort. And I also want to give a shout out to Russ Lum, because he was part of one of our delegations that went to Bogota, and it was wonderful to be with him and wonderful to see him today.
Okay, I show Russell raising the hand.
No, just in greeting and in applause for these words by Frank and the lifting up of Jack and Paige.
Okay, okay. If we don't have any more questions, I would like to continue with the program. We have Lolo again, and this time he's gonna sing No Basta Rezar, Praying is Not Enough. Well, thanks all again. Anyway, I have the pleasure, it's a real pleasure to introduce a compañera. A compañera that is, she was born and raised in Portland, so she is a Portlander. But at the same time, she is in Nicaragua. She became a chavala, she became a compañera, she became a cipota, she became a luchadora solidaria. How she got involved? When she was in college, she got interested in helping others. And interestingly, she has learned how to see solidarity. And she has witnessed how solidarity can grow. And she has seen how to harvest solidarity. Please welcome Erika, Takeo.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah,
Thank you,
welcome.
Dago, for that introduction.
Yeah, Dago
Wasn't prepared for that.
Erika.
Nice to see some of you who I haven't seen for quite some time. Russell, Maribel. I guess I just saw Dan and Paige and Nan recently as we were preparing for this brunch. And thanks everybody for being here. Thanks PCASC for the invitation for me to share this time with you. It's hard to follow the footsteps of Frank, who gave a really inspiring talk about international worker solidarity. Hopefully I can complement some things there. So what I have decided to prepare today is to talk a little bit about Nicaragua through the lens of the organization that I work in. So I work within the international relations team of the Asociación de Trabajadores del Campo, or Rural Workers Association, but I'm just going to say ATC in this talk. It's an organization that was founded just before the triumph of the Sandinista Revolution, and is also a founding member of the international peasant movement called La Via Campesina, which some of you might have heard of in other contexts. And then I'm going to finish up by talking about this harvesting of solidarity, as Dago would say, through the Friends of the ATC Solidarity Network, and then give a few options for ways to take action in solidarity with Nicaragua, and that are some that are very immediate and some that are more long-term. So I am going to, I did prepare some slides. There is quite a lot of content, but I'm going to share that with the PCASC core team so that you can share with everyone that's here, because I tried to make the presentation very practical. So there's lots of links, and there's also lots of links to videos that you're not going to see right now, but hopefully later today or in the coming days. If you're interested, you can use as resources for your own study, for your own organizations, and also for PCASC as an anti-imperialist solidarity organization. So hopefully everyone knows a little bit about Nicaragua before coming to this presentation. I know that PCASC was born at the same time with the birth of the Sandinista Popular Revolution. So I didn't include too much about the kind of early stages of that. But I do want to say that the revolution continues to be alive and well, and the ATC is an organization that's born out of that context, but that's specifically focused on improving the quality of life of people in the Nicaraguan countryside. And Nicaragua is still very much a rural and agrarian nation. It grows most of its own food, and about half of the country's 6.5 million population lives in rural areas. It's in the middle of the Central American Isthmus, and it's really the country in Central America that we might hear less about, or if we do hear about it, it often includes a lot of information that as you continue to hear, is really not the true reality of the country, which is really presenting an example like Cuba, like Venezuela, like a lot of countries on the left, of an alternative way forward, an alternative construction of society. So to talk a little bit about the ATC, it's an organization that's born just before the triumph of the Sandinista Revolution, the initial stages, 1975, through the creation of some worker committees along the Pacific coast of the country. And the organization was formally founded in 1978, so just 1 year before the triumph. And with the triumph of the revolution, that takes on a very important role in organizing the rural sectors of society to build a new type of society, right? Away from this US-backed Somoza dictatorship that had ruled the country for 45 years, basically treated Nicaragua like its backyard and listened to whatever the US said. So something that was really an alternative that focused on social justice, dignity, anti-imperialism, women's rights, sovereignty, as well as solidarity, which I think is the kind of key central theme of today. And perhaps the ATC's most important contribution during this first phase of the revolution was the agrarian reform. So under the Somoza dictatorship, Somoza and his friends and family basically controlled the majority of the country's arable land. But through the agrarian reform, about half of the country's arable land was redistributed into the hands of 120,000 peasant families, which was quite a lot considering that the population of the country at that time was just about 3 million people. The one video I wanted to show is this first video here, which is some images from the ATC's historic archives, which might bring back some memories for some of you that were here in the 1980s, which is part of a project that we're doing to rescue a lot of the historic memory of the organization. So I'd just like to put this video on so that you can see a couple images that we've been able to recover from these archives.
Los trabajadores nicaragüenses sufrieron en época de la dictadura somocista la más brutal explotación que régimen alguno haya practicado en la sociedad. De esta oprobiosa situación surge la ATC, del seno de los trabajadores oprimidos y explotados del sector agropecuario, que ven esta forma organizativa que les permite hacer justicia a sus justas reivindicaciones.
Prácticamente empezó a dirigir de esta manera en nuestra zona a los campesinos y obreros de nuestro sector. Nuestros primeros compañeros que se acercaron a nosotros, pues, y nos transmitieron la necesidad de lucha, pues, de vivir para transformar la situación.
Gracias a esta revolución, mi sueño fue, usted sabe muy bien que los sueños de ser una madre son muy grandes para mí. Yo mi sueño es de que aprenda a leer, logre ella este futuro de lo que yo he soñado y que mi sueño sea pues realidad. De que ella irá a ser la única del triunfo, porque nuestros niños son los del triunfo que van a lograr un triunfo definitivo.
So those are just some archives that are part of the historic archives of our organization. I forgot to mention that they were released as part of the 43rd anniversary that was celebrated in March. But I think those are really moving images that speak to a lot of this worker-to-worker solidarity, especially in rural areas. to grow food for the country. That was very much the typical, was a very important role of the ATC in this first phase. But I also really wanted to call attention to something that Dago already talked about, was that in this first phase, it was also a very, very important time for international solidarity with the revolution. Here, the figure of Ben Linder, who's so important for Portlanders, for PCASC, I think for international solidarity in general, who was in Nicaragua to support the installation of electricity projects in the northern rural areas. That has built that was a really important foundation for solidarity with the revolution. But at the same time, of course, as you all know, the U.S. government continued to apply imperialist aggression against the country. The U.S.-backed Contras perpetrated horrific human rights violations. We all remember the illegal sales of crack cocaine into Black and working class communities in the U.S. to fund the war, the sanctions, et cetera, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, how those efforts are ongoing. Those weren't just something that existed in the 1980s. But in 1990, when the Sandinistas lose power, the ATC and also the revolution kind of take on a new phase with the entry of 3 neoliberal presidencies here in Nicaragua, but also the kind of boom of neoliberalism around the world. So here in Nicaragua, the ATC in this time period really dedicated itself to defending land, to defending the gains of this first phase of the revolution, the agrarian reform, and focused especially on land that was not just for Sandinistas, but also for former Contras, many of whom were peasants who also needed land to grow food for their communities, which was a really important peacemaking strategy and one of the things that really characterizes the ATC in this period. But it was also a really important time for articulating international solidarity amongst small farmer and peasant organizations. And with the rise of neoliberalism, and also a really important campaign that took place here in Latin America while governments and the Spanish government were celebrating the 500th anniversary of the arrival of Christopher Columbus to the Americas. The popular organizations got together to create a continental campaign of 500 years of indigenous, Black, peasant, and popular resistance. And out of that came the creation of 2 really important movements at the continental level called Coordinadora Latinoamericana de Organizaciones del Campo, CLOC, and at the international level called La Via Campesina. Some of you might have heard of this. It's a movement that's still very strong today and that is known for coining the concept of food sovereignty. It's an international movement that is anti-capitalist, anti-neoliberalism, anti-imperialist, and anti-patriarchy, and really is focused on how to build solidarity across the peasant class of people who are growing food around the world. So that's something that really characterized the ATC at this period of time. Now to arrive finally to the more present day, here in Nicaragua, the Sandinista government is back in power since they won the elections in 2006 and have continued to win the popular vote by an increasing percentage each time, which is in part because this new phase of the revolution is really marked by a lot of impressive social developments in this tiny Central American country that would be really astonishing to find anywhere in any country around the world and are kind of, they're seldom talked about internationally. So to name a few things, massive reduction of poverty and extreme poverty, restoring the right to universal education and healthcare. Anyone who's here in Nicaragua can study for free all the way through university. Anyone who's here in Nicaragua can access healthcare services for free, no questions asked. Nicaragua has also recognized indigenous and Afro-descendant territories, especially along the Caribbean coast, and has worked to restore indigenous and Afro-descendant rights. There's been major projects in infrastructure that have some of the best highways in the region, recreational spaces for everyone for free, potable water. Nicaragua now has about 99% electricity coverage. Ben Linder would be so proud. Nicaragua also ranks 5th in the world for gender equality. And all of these have created a condition in which there's very low immigration rates out of the country. You don't see the same numbers of Nicaraguans moving north to the United States as its neighbors just to the north in the so-called Northern Triangle. Here, I'm leaving a few links that we're not going to see. So a video, an excellent documentary actually made by a comrade, Honduran North American, whose name is Ramiro Sebastian Funes, who just produced this 2-hour documentary about his recent visit to Nicaragua with the ATC. Has a lot of footage where you can see with your own eyes what Nicaragua looks like today. And also there's a link here to a course taught by a Nicaraguan journalist that gives all of the statistics with numbers about how all of these different social factors have improved in the past 14 years. And in terms of the ATC, so I'm going to go on the next slide. It's going to try and I'm going to pass over it. The ATC's big contribution in all of this has been the construction of food sovereignty. So basically ensuring that peoples, especially farmers and consumers, have the right to control their food system, construct it, defend it. And Nicaragua, Nicaraguan small farmers grow about 80% of the country's food. About 90% of what Nicaraguans consume here in Nicaragua is produced by Nicaraguans. And this is a really important factor too against ongoing threats of imperialist intervention. The ATC also continues to organize through 2 really important organizing structures that are legacies of the revolution, farm worker unions, building worker solidarity to improve conditions for the workers in the organization, as well as small farmer peasant cooperatives, which many of which are a product of the agrarian reform, which gave land to lots of small farmers. And then last but not least, I wanted to mention the importance of agroecology. Agroecology being understood as not just a set of practices or techniques of sustainable, or what we might call in the US organic agriculture, but also kind of rescuing a whole traditional way of peasant life that's based on ancestral knowledge. And here in Nicaragua, the ATC leads an internationally recognized agroecological institute called the Latin American Institute of Agroecology, Ichimuleo, which means land of corn in Maya Quiche. It's an agroecological institute for students, not just Nicaraguan students, but students from throughout the Mesoamerican region, which is the birthplace of corn, as well as we have students from the Caribbean region. So all of these really, really amazing things are happening despite ongoing tactics by empire, led by the US government, which have been attempting to overthrow not just the Sandinista government, but also all of these ideas that are really the legacy of Sandino, whose name was taken up by the FSLN for the triumph of the Sandinista revolution. So many of you may have heard that in 2018, there was an attempt to overthrow the government. It failed. It didn't work. Many people woke up quickly to realize that it was a failed coup attempt. However, internationally, there still continues to be a lot of a very strong media war, really, against Nicaragua and against the Sandinista government, which has led the way to pave a path, basically, for a series of U.S. sanctions. So at the end of 2018, the NICA Act was passed, which limits the Nicaraguan government's access to international credit. A lot of individuals in the Nicaraguan government have been sanctioned. But thankfully, there's a lot of anti-imperialist journalists who have been doing a lot of work to expose what has been going on, the U.S. funding of media opposition groups to attempt to overthrow the government. And this is all in part because the U.S. government openly acknowledged is that the Sandinistas have a lot of popular support here in Nicaragua, and that the U.S.'s preferred opposition groups can't win through the election channel because the Sandinistas are too popular. So they have to finance through different apparatus, through U.S. aid, through the National Endowment for Democracy, other kinds of tactics to overthrow the government. So here I'm leaving a number of resources also at the end of the presentation for some videos, some links to read more about this. Okay, so going into the second part of what I wanted to share with all of you is kind of this, as Douglas said, the harvest of the solidarity. I wanted to share the example of the Friends of the ATC Solidarity Network, which is an initiative that was born in 2016. In solidarity with the ATC, but as you can tell by all of these things I've just explained, solidarity not just with the ATC, solidarity with the ATC means solidarity with Nicaragua, with the Sandinista revolution. with the CLOC, with La Via Campesina, with this agroecology school, IALA. And so we work on a lot of different things, but all based upon these principles of solidarity and two other main principles, internationalism, understanding that our struggles are connected and we have to be united in order to overcome common enemies. I think Frank's talk is something that spoke really strongly to that, as well as anti-imperialism. We always take an anti-imperialist stance in our organizing, and that's really key to the solidarity work that we do. I also wanted to mention that Friends of the ATC is made up of mostly North Americans and many young people. Most of whom are younger than me. So in the next couple of slides, I wanted to just share a couple of examples of some of the ways that we have been working in these past couple of years that fit within three main categories: people-to-people exchanges as well as training, a lot of communications work, publications, research, and direct solidarity through fundraising and the creation of some solidarity markets. So here's some pictures. I think really one of the fundamental or core components of constructing solidarity is allowing peoples from different experiences to talk with one another face to face. I think that's been really difficult in the context of the pandemic. However, I don't think solidarity organizing has stopped by any means. Through Friends of the ATC, we have always organized different delegations to Nicaragua, speaking tours in the US. We've actually shared some events in person with PCASC. We also bring interns here to Nicaragua from different countries. We're going to be receiving 3 interns next month from the US, Japan, and Europe. So that's pretty exciting. We also really think that political and ideological training for people in solidarity is really, really important. So last year we launched the Ben Linder Solidarity School online. So thinking about the legacy of Ben Linder as someone who really understood what internationalism was, gave his life for internationalism, for solidarity. And these materials from last year's Ben Linder Solidarity School are actually available on our website. So at the end of the presentation, there's a link to it, but we're going to do another school this year. But it's basically a 101 on a lot of different topics that are related to the ATC and how to continue to strengthen solidarity and internationalism in our different organizing spaces. Then moving on to the examples of communications. We do a lot of, there's a small but mighty group of people doing different communications work in solidarity with Nicaragua. Friends of the ATC focuses a lot on sharing these experiences that are little told in international media from the countryside, from rural areas, from leaders of the ATC in constructing food sovereignty, agroecology, working on climate justice. And so we have a lot of publications that are based on testimonies of ATC leaders, both in English and Spanish, with lots of beautiful photos. We also do a lot of work in videos that we have on our website. We also share through social media, again, both in Spanish and English, that are working to show this true reality of Nicaragua that presents a really amazing example of how to organize our societies. So leaving a couple examples here. And then last but not least, we organize direct support for our Latin American Institute of Agroecology, as well as a series of demonstration parcels in agroecology in the northern part of the country that are all led by young people who are part of our organization. So in a whirlwind overview, a little bit of what we're doing through Friends of the ATC, like I said, all led by young people. We have a team of mostly North Americans who do a lot of work online, that come here in person, as well as a team here that's based out of the International Relations Office of the ATC. So I have no idea how I'm doing on time. I'm almost done though. So I wanted to conclude by just offering a couple suggestions for next steps of ways to take action specifically for PCASC. So first, I do really want to emphasize that the US government continues to try and delegitimize the Sandinista government, apply sanctions, and especially this is taking place in the context of the lead up to the presidential elections this year. So there's a bill both in the Senate and in the House to apply new sanctions against Nicaragua. It would basically ramp up the sanctions of the NICA Act that was passed in 2018. Alliance for Global Justice, one of our really important allies, is organizing a campaign and has some really great talking points to encourage people to contact their representatives and senators to tell them to not support this new set of sanctions, which is called the Renacer Act. Second, I think it's so important for people to come to Nicaragua right now to see with your own eyes all of the things that are taking place in this really beautiful country. Friends of the ATC organizes delegations, work raids. We also have post internships for young people. But even if you can't do any of those things, I would even encourage people to come, as a visitor, as a tourist. It's a very safe place to be in the context of the pandemic. Nicaragua has had excellent management of the pandemic and was recently named one of the top 10 safest countries in the world to visit during the pandemic. And then last but not least, as Portlanders, continuing the legacy of Ben Linder, we will have another Ben Linder Solidarity School this year, and would encourage everyone to participate. It's going to be 10 weeks long on Saturdays, starting at the beginning of August. And we don't have the launch materials ready yet, but we will have it soon, and I'll make sure that PCASC has it. I'm going to stop my screen share because I can't see everyone. There's a couple more slides on the presentation, but they're just a list of resources. So lots of links, lots more videos. A lot of material specifically about the Nicaragua current context. So there's a couple books that were written by internationalists that explain what happened in the 2018 coup attempt, for example. What are the ways that the U.S. has financed the opposition groups and the coup attempt in 2018? There's another book specifically about 2019 that starts to get into also how Nicaragua, for example, has managed the pandemic, advanced climate justice, advanced food sovereignty, all of these things that we often don't hear about in the international media. And then I also have some materials that are a little bit more specific to the ETC. But I think if there's just one thing that I could really encourage everyone to watch, if you haven't seen it yet, is this documentary called Nicaragua Against Empire. It's 2 hours long, but it's really just an amazing and powerful audiovisual that summarizes the history of the Sandinista revolution within the context of the Central American liberation movements. It goes into the 2018 coup attempt and then has lots of footage from this recent visit that Ramiro made to Nicaragua, that he visited areas of Managua, areas of the northern part of the country, peasant communities organized by the ATC, and then also visited the Caribbean coast, which is where indigenous and Afro-descendant the majority of the indigenous Afro-descendant populations live, and that had also was also recently hit by, in November of last year, hurricanes Eta and Iota, which were Category 5 hurricanes that Nicaragua has been able to address in the context of its resilience against climate change. So I guess, I don't even know how long I talked for. If it was over 20 minutes, it might have been. But I'll close there to see if there's questions. And whatever we want to do to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Erika. Yes, you were right on time. That was perfect. Now we enter into the question and answers section for Erika. Anybody is welcome to ask whatever comes to mind to Erika.
Erika, this is Mo. Hi. I have, over the past 2 years, gotten a fair amount of that, I guess you might say, propaganda against Ortega and the Nicaraguan government. Some of it coming from fairly trusted by me sources within Nicaragua, within the Catholic Church. Do you have comments about that?
I have some, because of course I don't know specifically who you've spoken with, but I will say that in the context, most of the Catholic Church, although of course not all, I mean, we do know that liberation theology, for example, played a really important role, especially in the 1980s, in building support for the revolution. But I will say that the Catholic Church, especially the structure of the Catholic Church, played a big role in supporting the coup attempt of 2018. I don't know if I included in my presentation In the first, actually, there is a link in the book that we wrote that I think I have a copy of here. No, I don't have the second one. The book that's called Nicaragua, Live from Nicaragua, Uprising or Coup. There's a book about the role of the Catholic Church in the 2018 coup attempt, including a lot of Catholic priests approving the torture of Sandinistas in the roadblocks that were set up around the country, as well as storing arms and weapons for the opposition, for people who are instilling violence throughout the country. The lack of collaboration in what was supposed to be a neutral position of the national dialogue that took place in 2018, and building of a lot of alliances at the international level with other, especially Catholic universities in the United States. So yeah, unfortunately, the Catholic Church has played quite a big role in supporting, especially the 2018 coup attempt, and in general, being against the Sandinista government. Yeah. I see Frank's hand is up, I think.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, I appreciated the previous question. I had two questions. One, can you speak at all about the work toward building the canal through Nicaragua? And also, part of the explanation for the exodus from the Northern Triangle had to do with two massive hurricanes in the span of 2 weeks impacting the Central American region. And I wonder how Nicaragua's response was different from the other countries in the region.
I'm glad you asked that second question too, because I wanted to talk about it and didn't have time. So yeah, the canal. So I'm going to be totally honest, though, I haven't heard anything here in Nicaragua about the canal for a couple of years. It's not an active project, although it still continues to be used internationally. Some of you might know that the U.S., before it successfully was able to build the canal in Panama, tried to do it in Nicaragua. And there was a treaty actually signed between, basically, they made the Nicaraguan government sign a treaty with the U.S. government that said that the only government that would have the rights to build a canal in Nicaragua would be the U.S. That treaty, which I think is called the Byron Chamorro Treaty, has now expired. It lasted for 100 years, and after that expired, there were these discussions about the building of a canal to connect the Caribbean with the Pacific coast. Because in Nicaragua, there is a river and a giant lake that would not require, the same massive amount of construction to build a canal as compared to other parts of the Central American Isthmus. A couple of years ago, there was a lot of news about the construction of the canal that I really think was, regardless of people's individual opinions about it, I think was heavily manipulated to build support against the Sandinista government that had proposed the project along with Chinese investors. However, it's kind of it's not an active project, to be totally honest. The Chinese investors that were going to be heavily investing in the canal, I haven't heard anything about it recently. It's not a big conversation of debate here. I definitely think the canal topic is also part of the geopolitical struggle that we're seeing in Central America, because this canal would be controlled by a government on the left rather than, a government that is, basically lets the U.S. do whatever it wants and treats it, allows it to be the U.S.'s backyard. So, yeah, I guess I shared some of my opinion, but also it's not really an active point of conversation at all. And then the hurricane piece, so 2 Category 5 hurricanes, Eta and Iota, that actually hit basically the same part of the northern Caribbean coast of Nicaragua in November, within 2 weeks of one another. that caused massive destruction throughout the Central America region, but especially really went through Nicaragua and caused a lot of damage in Honduras, Guatemala, and to some extent El Salvador. Like you said, and very importantly so, Frank, created a lot of migration out of the Northern Triangle countries. Yes, of course, it impacted Nicaragua and caused a lot of damage, but it was mostly in infrastructure. And there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, the Nicaraguan government has a really, really well-organized system in terms of national disaster prevention and mitigation and post-disaster response. Nicaragua is lucky in the sense that the Caribbean coast is a lot less densely populated in comparison to, for example, Honduras, which has a very heavily populated Caribbean coast region that was just horrifically devastated. But everyone was evacuated ahead of time. There were no deaths on the Caribbean coast as a result of the hurricanes. There were about 20 deaths and the second hurricane in the Pacific region that were a response of landslides from basically completely saturated soils in communities that had been told to evacuate ahead of time, had been offered support, but people didn't want to leave, which is also understandable. It's hard to leave your home if you're, but it has a very well-organized both national and regional disaster response prevention system. And since then, the national government has worked really, really hard to ensure recovery, especially in the Caribbean coast region. So hundreds and thousands of the corrugated metal roofing, how do you say, laminate de zinc roofing were sent to the Caribbean coast directly after the hurricane. A big priority was put on water and electricity and communications being restored within a few days after the hurricane passed. It is, I will say that because of the U.S. sanction, it is a challenge to access international credit to look more at the long-term recovery as well as kind of general resilience against climate change. And that's something that we did here because we coordinated a delegation in March that went to the Caribbean coast in part to see basically where the hurricanes hit landfall in the communities that are in a lot of amazing ways have recovered. But of course, I mean, a Category 5 hurricane hitting your community causes a lot of destruction. And so on the one hand, there's been a lot of repressive things that have been happening, but on the other hand, it's really important to take action to support or to take a stand against sanctions so that Nicaragua can access the appropriate loans, but also have the appropriate international backing for funding in general to recover from these hurricanes.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions for Erika? Yeah, Natasha is raising the hand.
I was muted, sorry. Erika, I wanted to know what is happening with the women's movement in Nicaragua. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thanks, Natasha. So I think I had mentioned in kind of in the middle of the presentation that Nicaragua has made some really massive advancements in terms of women's rights. In fact, it ranks 5th in the world for gender equality, and this is on a scale that's not done by some, institution that's leftist. I think it's the World Economic Forum. I'm hearing some echo. I don't know if anyone else is hearing echo.
Yeah.
It might be coming from, I don't know if it's coming from, let's see, is it there? Okay, I think it was, okay, it's fixed. It's written into Nicaragua's laws that in all, for example, all political positions as well as institutions of the government, that there has to be gender parity. So if there's, there's co-directors, there's co-leaders in all these positions. So if there's a man in the position, there also has to be women. There's actually in a lot of spaces more women than men. It's a lot of women coming from working class backgrounds, the barrio, places that in any previous Nicaraguan government would ever have been imagined. And that's the same case in the context of the ATC in the countryside. There's been really, really amazing advancements to ensure women's rights, ensure women's access to land, which has been this whole kind of second part of the agrarian reform of giving land title not just to men, but also to women. As well as a wide series of programs that focus specifically on women. I think that the women's movement is another topic that has also, unfortunately, been, and this could be the question why, this could be why Natasha might have the question. I think it's another topic that's been manipulated in the international media because, I mean, as a woman living here in Nicaragua, there's so many things that you can have here in Nicaragua that I think we can only dream of in the context of the U.S. I mean, even women holding political leadership positions or being directors of their institutes, really being allowed to express themselves, et cetera, are things that don't even happen in the context of the U.S. And so, of course, by no means has been the patriarchy being abolished here in Nicaragua. Machismo is still something that's very strong. These are, ongoing tasks of the Sandinista revolution, which has really been built by women and have taken into account the importance of women's rights, part of the FSLN's historic program. It's also part of, the ATC's work that has its own women's movement. So there are a lot of really amazing things that are happening here in terms of women's rights and the women's movement.
Good. Any other questions for Erika?
Yeah, I noticed that we have some union organizers in the audience here. Alma and Luz work with organizing unorganized workers, low-paid workers. And I'm thinking that here in our organization, and I know Russell organizes and Sarah supports it with Jobs with Justice, maybe some others. It seems like you folks could put your heads together with Frank and Erika and really, pass back and forth how we can build more solidarity, such as you've spoken of in your talks, and it just seems like it's a real path forward for all of us in all of our works. The channel of worker organizing.
Any comment on Jack's work?
Hi everyone. My name is Alma Raya, and I've been doing a lot of organizing and mainly right now with immigrant workers. But before I say anything about that, I just wanted to give a shout out to Erika, and you're so inspirational. I'm like, I want to go there and work with Erika. So thank you so much for sharing this. And if anyone's interested in watching the documentary virtually together, let me know. I'd love to do that. It's so great about all of the work that y'all are doing out there. And I'm wondering, what's kind of the support for the workers that end up, migrating here. And still some of the worst working conditions from, that we see, either whether it is farm workers or anywhere they go, whether it is at a hospital, essential workers, medical interpreters. It just seems so messed up on how immigrant workers and with language barriers that they go through. So if anyone wants to connect about, how to do some good stuff.
Well, thank you, Alma, for your words. I'm going to say something in terms of time. I'm going to finish the question and answer section, but I want to say something that just came to my mind. They're talking about the North Triangle, which is Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, right? And they talk about that triangle in terms of the migration. But there's a more powerful triangle. And that more powerful triangle is Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. I mean, right now, that triangle is more powerful, and we have to support that triangle to make it even stronger. Okay, that's what it came to my mind. Ready, Nan? we are ready for the last song. It's going to be El Sombrero Azul. Just let me say something. El Sombrero Azul was composed by a Venezuelan singer, Ali Primera, and it became like the second anthem of El Salvador. Lolo recorded that for us, and then after him, we are going to have the parting words, in which after that, this brunch will be over. Okay, go ahead, Nan.
And I'm going to put the words to the song in the chat, so sing along. You can even unmute.
Oh, well, we are having technical difficulties.
Cuando se entrega el amor, como el alma libera, Hoy andan por nuestras tierras, o andan por sus corrales, pero dale salvadoreño, que hay más pájaros pequeños, que después de asar el vuelo, se depende en su hogar. Dale salvadoreño, que no hay pájaro pequeño, que después de asar el vuelo, se depende en su hogar. Hermanos salvadoreños, viva tu sombrero azul. Dale que tu limpia sangre terminará sobre el mar. Mi cero de hermosa rosa, amor por la humanidad. Hermanos salvadoreños, viva tu sombrero azul. Tendrán que llenar el mundo con masacres del sur, para quitarte las ganas del amor que tienes tú. Dale salvadoreño, que no hay pájaro pequeño, que después de alzar el vuelo se detenga en su hogar. Pero dale salvadoreño, que no hay pájaro pequeño, que después de alzar el vuelo se detenga en su hogar. Pero dale salvadoreño, que no hay pájaro pequeño, que después de alzar el vuelo se detenga en su hogar. Dale salvadoreño, dale salvadoreño, dale salvadoreño, dale salvadoreño.
Well. Oh man, this is a sad part of this brunch meeting, and we are getting closer to its end, and it breaks my heart. Anyway, we are at the end, and I want to say thank you everybody for coming here, but we still have to say some things. One of them is, I'm not very good at this, but I have to say it. I'm going to try to say it in a very inspired way so I can inspire you. And don't forget that you can donate to PCASC on our website, pcasc.net. We have a small base of sustainers, and we need more so that we can better support our partners in Latin America with material aid. As an all-volunteer organization, we use our sustainers and donors' money to spread around in solidarity with the struggles in Latin America. Help us by clicking the donate button and sign up to make it a monthly donation, large and small, it all helps. I'm not very good at saying that, so I just read it.
Good job, Dago. And also I want to say, anybody who goes to that donate button at PCASC.net and signs on to be a monthly sustainer, I will make you a pie.
Oh, wow.
And if you don't live in town, I will send you my solidarity granola. So.
Okay. Unfortunately, I cannot promise pupusas. And I think Erika cannot promise nacatamales.
O gallo pinto.
O gallo pinto, yeah. O gallo pinto. Well, you have been presented with Frank talking about Colombia and Paige. Thank you for the wonderful job you guys are doing there. And also you heard Erika, la chavala de Nicaragua, la cipota solidaria. And in PCASC, you can follow us. We have changed different things, like for guys that knew PCASC since a long time, remember La Lucha Solidaria. La Lucha Solidaria was the newsletter. And then we changed the name of La Lucha Solidaria to Solidaridad en el Siglo XXI. And the reason why we changed it is because we want to be in parallel, marching parallel to Socialismo en el Siglo XXI. Remember that socialismo goes together with anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism, anti-racism. We want to be Solidaridad en el Siglo XXI. That's why we named our newsletter.
Yes, I just, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to say I'm very happy to have been part of the, to view this program. It's a wonderful program, and it's been our pleasure with the Columbia Support Network. I'm the program director of Columbia Support Network based in Madison, Wisconsin. And it's just been a terrific pleasure for us to work with Paige and the others with respect to the workers at the Coal Motores plant in Bogota. Paige has done great work there, and your organization has done great work. I've also I was in Nicaragua many years ago, helping with the Constitution for the Sandinista government in 1986 to 88. And it's really wonderful to get Erika's report on what's going on there. It's so pleasing to me personally that things are going well, even with the substantial opposition that the U.S. government has opposed to this for years. But congratulations to you on a wonderful program, and thank you so much for making it available for me so that I could join with you folks. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anybody?
Yes, I just want to say that we will be doing another event next month to celebrate our 42nd anniversary. And our anniversary is on 19 de Julio, the 19th of July, the Sandinista Liberation Day. And we are not positive that will be the exact date, but we will be sending out invitations to everyone for that. And we will have more amazing speakers on that day as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to thank everybody for being here today. I hope to see you again in a month. And also just thanks for all of the help along the way, whether you've helped make tamales or if you've purchased cookies or pies in the past to help support the injured workers. The Columbia Support Network opening up the conference to let us speak there and tell the story, visiting the tents and stuff. It's just been, it's been work that's been shared on a lot of shoulders, and I'm just grateful for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, I just I think we're planning to send out a follow-up with links to the recordings and the resources that, for instance, that Erika has shared and so on, and encouraging us to have a follow-up meeting. Some of you have expressed want to talk and learn more and get together more. So that would be the best outcome of this, is for us to bring more of this home here to us and to organize together, because we can do the same kind of work that Frank and Erika have done, in bringing an international solidarity worker to worker and dropping the nation state seduction of. So anyhow, let's get together and follow up to our email that will come out. Thank you. Just a reminder, the people of the world who are oppressed by the empire ask us for our help in getting our government and our economic elites off their backs, and we're the ones that can do that. So there's a lot of work for us to do to build the support in this country through the kind of work that we've been taught about today, and just to get together and call on our members of Congress, for instance, to work for us and against this NICA Act, and our members of the City Council to pass a Saving Lives resolution for U.S. and local government cooperation with Cuba against COVID-19. Cuba would send they have 2 vaccines in end-stage development. They would send them to the whole third world, all the people in the world who were discriminated against by the current vaccine manufacturers. Mm-hmm.
I just want to say before we go, thank you, Erika. Thank you, Frank. Those were really inspiring and amazing presentations. And we really appreciate your solidarity today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.